Evening, everybody. I was thinking about this lesson, how am I going to start it? And I was like, well, maybe I'll say a well pun or something like that. But then I decided not to. There's not a pun coming. The only pun you're going to get is that one that's in the bulletin. So if you want to look at that, you'll figure it out. You've probably noticed, or maybe you've never noticed, that as you read through the Bible, wells are a pretty prominent feature. And really, when you start thinking about it, it makes good sense why they're mentioned so often, because wells are kind of like, I don't know, I thought they were kind of like the ancient water cooler at the workplace or something. This is where a lot of conversations would happen at a well, and an obvious meeting place for people. They were very important, to the town, or especially in desert regions. Not only were wells would be very important, but almost militarily, it's like a strategic locations, right? And as you read through the Bible, the Bible narrative kind of takes you through a lot of places like that, a lot of desert regions. And wells also came to be used as symbols of life and provision. And I think you can figure out why. And they're often mentioned as such in the Bible's poetry books. Now, if you want to turn to Genesis 16, you're more than welcome to. If you include words like spring and fountain and cistern, then you have wells being mentioned, or at least referred to, over 200 times across both the Old and New Testaments. Sometimes, well, maybe I guess we would say a lot of times, it's talking about a literal source of water, like the well, the picture you kind of see here, and then the wells that we're used to, right? But other times, the word is used figuratively to talk about all kinds of things. You have the wells referring to the adulteress woman in Proverbs 23. Wells referring to a wife in Song of Solomon. Wells refer to a city, and then Jeremiah. And then wells, maybe the one that maybe Christians are most familiar with, a well or a spring being a source of eternal life, which is found in John 4, and we're going to eventually talk about that particular event. So, wouldn't you know it, that we can get some pretty good lessons from the things that took place at certain wells throughout the Bible. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a little journey from well to well to well, and we're going to satisfy our thirst for knowledge. The first one is in Genesis 16. We get a lesson about comfort and hope. Now, this is the first mention, unless I missed it, the first mention of a well or spring in the Bible, and it's kind of a heartbreaking scene. Now, there's a woman named Hagar, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with this account, and she was pregnant with Abraham's son, who they would later call Ishmael. And although the whole thing happened at Abraham's wife, Sarah, happened at her insistence, when Hagar got pregnant, Sarah was a little upset, and she drove Hagar away. Genesis 16 and verse 6, you see Sarah dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her presence. Okay. Now in 16:7 says, now the angel of the Lord found Hagar by a spring of water, a well in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. Now, so this angel does three things. I'm not going to read the whole account, but as I go along here and I tell the story, you just maybe looking down and you can kind of glance and listen to that and say, I think we can do that, right? So he asked her, he does a few things. He meets her where she was. He asked her the right questions. You see there in verse 8, where have you come from and where are you going? He's saying, don't tell me about your past and tell me about your plans for the future. And then he gives her the right counsel. Now, a pregnant woman, probably very young, running away into the wilderness, 9 times out of 10, ain't going to end very well. Maybe let's say 10 times out of 10. And so he says in verse 9, return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand. Now, admittedly, that's not the best, probably not going to be the best life that she could imagine, but she was a servant. How she got in that position, we have no idea, but she was a servant, and it was surely better for her to go back to Sarah and Abraham than for her to slowly die of dehydration in the desert, right? But the angel also gives her some reassurance. Here's where the comfort and the hope comes in. So 16, verse number 10. Then the angel of the Lord said to her, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude. You can think that sounds a lot like something God told somebody else a little bit earlier. And the angel of the Lord said to her, verse 11, Behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. He shall be a wild man. Now, we might not think that this is very comforting or very hopeful at all, but that's from our 21st century with our 21st century glasses on. But if you think of what position she was in, just listen, is that he shall be a wild man, his hand shall be against every man's hand against him. He shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. I'm thinking that all Hagar heard was, God's taking care of me. Everything's going to be okay. God's taking care of me. Then she does two things. She acknowledges the Lord by calling him, this is verse 13, calling him El Roi, Elroi. You might see in your Bible as its translation, which means you are the God who sees. All right. Little quick side note: the angel of the Lord was talking, but she refers to him as God. That's interesting, don't you think? And then she names the well, the living one who sees me. Now here we have Hagar, but a lowly servant. She's a person of low standing, and she knew it. And here she is. She's marveling at the mercy and compassion of God, who saw her and took pity on her. And that meant something to her. And I think it's interesting that later on, this is in chapter 21, you can read this a little bit later. Later on, God would open her eyes in another desperate situation she was in so that she could see. She's calling God here, you're the one who sees me. And God opens her eyes so she could see. And God ended up sparing her life once again. That's chapter 21. So what's the lesson here? Look, when everybody, and these are not some crazy, lessons that we're going to learn tonight, but they are still good for us to be reminded of. Look, when everybody else abandons, God does not. God does not do that. Samuel's mother, her name was Hannah. Listen to Hannah's prayer. This is 1 Samuel 2, 7 and 8. Hannah prays this: the Lord makes rich, makes poor, and makes rich. He brings low and lifts up. He raises the poor. Now listen how this might have application to Hagar. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the beggar from the ash heap to set them among princes and make them inherit the throne of glory. You know, there's going to be moments in life where you feel pretty beat down and alone. Like everything's going against you, but you need to remember that you're not. You're not alone. 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 14 tells us to comfort listen to this word, the faint-hearted. Literally, it means comfort the one with the little soul. Not that their soul is actually little, but that's how they feel. The little spirited, comfort the little spirited. And look, we might feel that way sometimes about ourselves, but thank God we have a God who can comfort us, and he can do it in every single trouble that we might find ourselves in life. 2 Corinthians 1 and verse 4 verse 3 calls him the God of all comfort. He can comfort us in all of our tribulations. Now, moving on from that well, we go to a second well. This is in Genesis 26. And we find a lesson on persistence. Now, this involves Abraham's second son, whose name was Isaac. So, Genesis 26, Isaac is living in the land of the Philistines at this time, and there's a famine going on. Obviously, at a time like that, your wells that are producing water, they're going to be pretty important, pretty crucial. And what happens is, this is how we are. Conflict usually arises over who gets to use the water, right? There's an old Indian story about a man who was willing to sell his well to another man, but he wasn't willing to sell the water that was in the well. Now you think about that for a moment. Yeah, you can buy my well, but you can't have the water. How about that? Desperate times make real mean men. And this is the kind of time that Isaac was living in, here we're reading about. So if you glance at verse 15 of Genesis 26, and the Philistines had filled in all of Abraham's wells. And Isaac decides, I'm going to go reopen one of them. And he's going to reopen that well, redig it in a place called Gerar. That's verse 18. At verse 20, you see certain herdsmen of this particular place, they began fighting with him over the use of the water. And so, you know what, Isaac just he's like, you know what, I'm fine. Have it, I'm moving on. Really my well anyway. But you know what, I'm going to go move on. And so he dug another well, verse 21, and they argued with him over that one. And so what does Isaac do? He don't fight it. Maybe put up a little bit of fight, but he moves on. And he digs another well, and then he seems, those who were fighting with him, they seem to be content. The first well he calls, and I'm not going to read the actual words, Esek. It means strife. The second well, he names it, he calls it opposition, because there's fighting going on. But the third well, where everything was cool, he called Rehoboth, and it means wide places. Wide places. I want you to think of it like breathing room. It's like Isaac is finally saying, finally, right? Have you ever had those moments, Mike, where you just need a little bit of breathing room? And get out of my face kind of thing? Genesis 26:22, for now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. Now, there's so much more that we could say about what Isaac did here, how he didn't fight, he just kind of went on, and we could say a lot about his final thought about God during this whole thing. But here's the lesson, and I know it's an oldie but a goodie, but again, I think it's one we need to be reminded of, is that, look, persistence pays off. Sounds like one of those things your parents, the kids get tired of hearing from their parents. Oh, just keep at it, honey. Oh, persistence pays off. Just keep working, try again, that kind of thing. But it's true. I think this is something that we forget as Christians, that we need to be persistent on some things. Galatians 6 and verse 9, Paul writes, and let us not grow weary while doing good. See the persistence? For in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Paul would write to the Corinthians, for all things are for your sakes, that grace having spread through the many may cause thanksgiving to abound to the glory of God. Therefore, because of those things, we do not lose heart. We keep going. We stay persistent. That's 2 Corinthians 4:15 and 16. I think we mess up big time when we wait until we are already at the point of giving up on whatever it might be before we start trying to figure out what to do. That's not wise, is it? And I think so. What we need to do is, it's like, I guess we're saying, like, preparation makes for some good persistence. I think that makes sense, right? We get two things in our mind right now so that we can be persistent as we need to be in the times we need to be. One, you got to expect difficulties to come. And just think very broadly. Just think about your whole life and all the things that could go wrong. I'm not saying, your glass, I think, still needs to be half full. Be optimistic about things. But look, expect some hard times to come. Expect some bumps in the road to happen on this particular, whatever thing you're trying to do or heading toward your goals. And that way we won't get surprised by it, and we'll be better equipped to deal with them and keep on persisting. And then number two, we can start doing this right now. I think we need to do it every day, really, is think deeply on Jesus Christ. And why I say that is because of Hebrews 12 and verse 2, where it says, for consider him, think deeply on him, meditate on who Jesus is and what the things that he went through. Hebrews 12:3, for consider him who endured, kept on going, persisted, such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. Look, I'm not saying it. The Bible's saying there's something to thinking and contemplating about on Jesus that helps us get through things. God expects his people to be persistent. There you go. Lesson number 2. All right, moving on to another well. This is in 2 Samuel 23, a little bit bigger leap in the Bible there. 2 Samuel 23. This is a lesson on service and honor. Now, so this is interesting. This is about David, and during one of David's more difficult encounters with the Philistines, and there's a lot of warring going on between Israel and Philistines. I think David and Goliath, right? David knew something about that. Here, David and a few of his men were trapped in a cave. This is verse 13, 2 Samuel 23. And their escape was blocked by a troop of Philistines. But the Philistines, not only blocking the cave that they're in, they went to Bethlehem and set up shop there. They set up a garrison in Bethlehem. And why is that? Why would that matter? Well, that's David's hometown. And so maybe they were going to David's hometown, trying to taunt David and mock him, saying, we got you holed up in the cave. Well, look, we're going to go to your hometown and just and do what we want to do over here. Or maybe they were trying to provoke him to come out from the protection of the cave so they could attack him and kill him. Or maybe it was a little bit of both. That particular cave that he was in didn't seem to have a natural water source. Some caves do, some caves don't. David started getting thirsty. So if you look in verse number 15 there, I think I'm in the right. Yeah. He openly expresses a desire for what? A drink of water from the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate. Now, we talked some Sundays ago about David's mighty men. Those are some mighty men. Those are some crazy dudes, all right? When you read about it, right? Remember? And they must have overheard David just kind of openly expressing this desire. And they lived up to their reputation, and they set out to get their king some water. Somehow, and don't we wish we knew how, they broke through the camp of the Philistines, verse 16. They entered into the occupied city of Bethlehem and drew water from the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate and took it and brought it to David. And how about that for some loyalty? Then David does something very unexpected. And I think what he does, his reaction to them bringing back this water that he just kind of, audibly, probably just having a thought out loud, shows that he didn't command them to do this. I don't think he even expected anybody to actually go and get this water. They go get the water, it comes back, and then what? Can you see ahead? He refuses to drink the water. And not only that, he pours the water on the ground. Now, at first, that seems pretty weird, if not insulting, right? I mean, imagine if I'm up here and I'm preaching, I'm sweating, and I'm hot, man, my throat is dry. I can get a drink of water. And my beautiful wife, she hears that, and she gets up, and she goes to the kitchen out there, and she grabs me a little bottle of water, and she just quietly sets it up here and says, "Thank you, honey." And I open that bottle of water, and I just go bloop, 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 right into this plant. Toss the bottle down there. What would y'all think? Crazy. I'd probably get slapped, wouldn't I? So he's saying, I wish I had water. They don't go to the kitchen to get it. They go behind enemy lines. Who knows what they had to do to get it. They bring it back to him. He says, "Thank you so much." Bloop. What was he doing? Here's why he did it. He was so overwhelmed by that act of devotion and bravery that those three men performed that the water from that well became a whole lot more than just water. It represented something so precious to him that he thought himself completely unworthy to drink it. So precious, in fact, that nobody was worthy to drink it, to have it, except the Lord himself. And so because of the risk that was involved, you see in verse 17, to David, all of a sudden, it came to symbolize the blood of the men who went in jeopardy of their lives. And so what do you do with something like that? You don't drink it for yourself. You pour it out as an offering to the Lord. And that's what he did. It's amazing how much these people thought of God in this Bible. And sometimes I think even the most religious people on this earth just, I don't know if they come even close to what they thought about the Lord. I mean, that's some serious stuff there. It reminds us of when Jesus was sitting at the table in Simon the leper's house. This is Mark chapter 14. And here comes in, a woman comes in, and she has this beautiful alabaster flask. It's full of fragrant, very expensive oil. And what does she do with it? Well, she just pours it, very costly, she just pours it onto Jesus. And to everybody there, almost everybody there, not to Jesus, she wasted it. And you could have done so much with all of that. It's very expensive. It cost so much money. But to her, that was the least she could have done for her king. You see the similarity there? So what's the lesson? Well, I suppose it's that no expense is too great when it comes to serving and honoring God. Christian men and women today are the mighty men and women of God. And they spare no expense and they take no shortcuts in fulfilling the king's requests. Romans chapter 13 and verse 7 says, render therefore to all their due, taxes to whom taxes are due, customs to whom customs, fear to whom fear. The idea there is reverence, and honor to whom honor. You give honor to those who are due honor. You give reverence to those who are due reverence. Who deserves more respect, reverence, fear from us than God? Can you name somebody? Who deserves more honor from us than his son, Jesus Christ, right? Here's the last one. We are jumping to the New Testament. Here's John chapter 4, lesson on salvation. This is when Jesus meets the Samaritan woman at the well. Verse 4 of this chapter is kind of interesting. It's one of those verses that you just overlook because you're trying to get to the conversation that Jesus is having with her. It says he needed to go through Samaria. You ever notice that? He had to go through Samaria. Now he was on his way to Galilee. Verse 4 seems to suggest that there was an alternate route to get there that didn't go through Samaria. But it says he needed to go that way. Any other Jew would have just gone the other way. Why? Because they didn't like the Samaritans. They were nasty, they were filthy, they were ungodly. So they didn't have to run into them. They just go the other way. Jesus purposefully went through there, likely to purposefully cross paths with the people that no other Jew really cared to cross paths with. Well, you think about that for a moment. This is not the lesson, but that is can you get a lesson out of that? That's pretty good, isn't it? So as a weary Jesus, so Jesus starts going, and as a weary Jesus, he stops and he takes a rest at this particular well, happened to be the well of Jacob. And a Samaritan woman, here she comes, she's drawing some water. And then this conversation begins. Now, this is a conversation or a very different encounter than he had with Nicodemus in the chapter before. Nicodemus, Pharisee, number one, he's a man. That makes it pretty different. He's a Pharisee, though. He's well educated. He was probably well dressed, probably well respected within the community, theologically trained in the old law. He comes out of that conversation and he goes right into a conversation with, not to downplay who she is or anything, but really compared to, in their society, compared to Nicodemus, who's she? She's just a nobody. She was a woman. Even his disciples were like, or even she was like, well, you're talking to me? You're talking to me, a woman? And you're a Jewish man? Samaritans, despised by the Jews. She probably had no big influence. She just comes in there and gets some water like she does every day. But you see, both Nicodemus and this woman needed Jesus Christ. They needed to be born again, John 3. They both needed the living water that only Jesus could offer. And of course, we all need those things as well, right? You get to wondering when Jesus was talking to her about the fountain of water, this well springing up into everlasting life. That's chapter 4:14. If the woman knew, and they knew the scriptures, Samaritans, if she knew that the prophet Zechariah had said that living waters were going to flow from Jerusalem, or you wonder if she knew that prophet Isaiah, wrote that one day in the future, God's people would draw water from the wells of salvation. Isaiah 12 and verse 3. That's interesting. So let's put all of these together, all of these accounts that we've talked about, and we find in Jesus a few similar things. He looks upon us with mercy and compassion, and he offers a greater comfort and a greater hope, just like the angel did with Hagar. While on earth, Jesus was persistent, just like Isaac, in digging those wells, persistent in his mission to create wide places so that everybody could enjoy salvation. Remember, he said that his Father's house has one mansion, or no, what does it say? Many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. John 14:2. You know what that means? Everybody who wants to go to heaven, don't worry, you'll fit. There's a place for you there. And then finally, thinking of the water that was secured from the well at Bethlehem, Jesus went to the greatest of lengths to secure salvation for us by offering himself in service and honor to the Father that ended on the cross. Pretty amazing that the Bible does that. I didn't do that. The Bible does that. And it's amazing. So what's the final lesson? I suppose that is that without Christ, we are, as Peter wrote, wells without water. Without Christ, we're living empty lives, and we don't want that for anybody. Certainly God doesn't want it for you either. So don't let that be you. Where exactly does Christ rank in your life, if we want to put it like that? You know where he needs to be. Appreciate your good attention. If there's anyone who needs to respond to the invitation, maybe you want to study the Bible to learn how to really put Christ first in your life. Maybe you want to study that. Maybe you need to repent of any sins in your life and be restored back to God. And certainly this is the time to do it. If you need anything at all, I hope you would let us know. Let's grab our songbooks and stand and sing.